Hey everyone, welcome back. Today, I've got a really special story for you. South Sudan, Africa. What do you know about this place? War, poverty, hunger, that's probably what comes to mind, right? But here's something you probably didn't know: there's a type of rice in South Sudan named after Korea. And I'm not talking about just any rice. The locals call it God's gift. It's called Korous, a combination of Korea and Rous, which means rice in their language. So how did this happen? How did something miraculous like this come out of a land torn apart by war and poverty? Stick around, because this story is gonna blow your mind. Let's rewind to 2020. Bor, South Sudan. This place had already been through hell. After breaking away from Sudan in 2011, South Sudan went through years of brutal civil war. People were desperate for peace, but the fighting just wouldn't stop. And then, in 2020, right when things couldn't get worse, another disaster hit. Massive flooding. The White Nile River overflowed, causing the worst floods the region had seen in decades. Water just swallowed everything: homes, villages, farmland, everything. There was this farmer named John Chul who lived in Bor. He remembers watching helplessly as everything he'd worked for his entire life got washed away in a single day. The mango trees he'd carefully grown, the corn, the sorghum, all gone. And it wasn't just crops. His livestock, the animals his family depended on for survival, they were swept away too. The flooding didn't just last a few weeks. The water stayed for months. Some areas were underwater for over a year. People lost their homes, couldn't farm, couldn't eat. The UN declared this a zone of extreme hunger risk. And here's the worst part: this wasn't a one-time thing. 2021, same story. 2022, it happened again. Climate change was making the rainy season more intense. And every year, Bor would flood. People were losing hope. We can't farm here anymore, they thought. We're gonna starve forever. When the water finally drained, all that was left was thick, sticky mud. This clay-like soil that the farmers just stared at in frustration. Nothing grew properly in this stuff. Too much water, too much mud. It seemed like the absolute worst conditions for farming. But you know what? That worst condition was about to become their greatest blessing. They just didn't know it yet. In 2021, the South Korean military peacekeeping unit called Hanbit arrived in Bor. About 300 Korean soldiers came as part of the UN peacekeeping mission to help stabilize South Sudan. But their job wasn't just about military peacekeeping. They had a civil operations mission, to basically helping improve the lives of local people. So when they arrived, the first thing they did was assess the situation. And what they saw was flooded land and starving people. The unit had meeting after meeting. How can we help these people? Just handing out food isn't gonna solve the root problem. We need to help them become self-sufficient. They knew they had to think bigger. Now here's where it gets interesting. While everyone else looked at all that water and thought, disaster, someone in the Korean unit had a completely different thought. Wait a minute, what if all this water is actually an opportunity? Total reverse thinking, right? See, for Koreans, when you think of land with lots of water, one thing comes to mind: rice paddies. That's what they thought of. Could we grow rice here? The conditions actually seemed perfect. Tons of water, clay soil that holds water really well, and South Sudan is near the equator. So it's warm year-round. Compared to Korea, where you can only grow rice once a year because of the seasons, South Sudan could theoretically grow rice continuously. The team got excited. They reported back to Korea and partnered with the Rural Development Administration. Together, they analyzed South Sudan's climate and soil, then selected special rice seeds designed for hot, humid environments. Late 2021, a special shipment arrived in South Sudan from Korea. Hundreds of kilograms of carefully selected rice seeds, along with small tractors, rice transplanters, and threshing machines. These tiny seeds had no idea they were about to create a miracle. The Hanbit Unit planned everything meticulously. They weren't just gonna hand out seeds and leave. They decided to work side by side with the locals through the entire process. Preparing the land, planting, maintaining, harvesting, everything. They wanted to teach people how to fish, not just give them fish, you know. They selected a pilot farm in Bor. About 5 hectares, that's roughly 12 acres. It was land left covered in mud after the floods. Then they approached the locals with a proposal. Hey, wanna try growing rice with us? At first, people were skeptical. And honestly, who could blame them? These folks had been growing corn, sorghum, and cassava their whole lives. Rice was a foreign concept. The idea of farming in flooded paddies? That made zero sense to them. One elder shook his head. You're saying something can grow in this waterlogged land? We've been farming here for decades. And whenever there's this much water, nothing grows. He had a point. The crops they knew couldn't survive in water. But the Korean soldiers didn't give up. They patiently explained that rice is different. It's special, it actually grows in water. But more importantly, they decided to show, not just tell. Actions speak louder than words, right? Slowly, people started gathering. Half curious, half doubtful. But some were willing to try. What do we have to lose? They figured. The floods had already taken everything. Early 2022, the real work started. First, they had to create actual rice paddies. They had to level the muddy land and build ridges to hold water. Korean soldiers operated the tractors to show how it's done, while locals worked alongside them with shovels and hoes, all of them sweating together. Once the land was ready, they prepared seed beds. They planted the Korean rice seeds in these beds and waited. About 2 weeks later, tiny sprouts started poking through. The locals watched in amazement. It's actually growing? Then came transplanting day. Korean soldiers and locals all stepped into the paddies together. Barefoot, feeling the mud between their toes for the locals. This was completely new. The Korean soldiers bent down and showed them how to plant the seedlings. And the locals copied them. At first, it was clumsy. Seedlings fell over, some were planted too deep, some too shallow. But the Koreans guided them every step of the way. Space them out like this. Don't plant them too deep. After hours and days of practice, people got the hang of it. They also learned how to use machinery. The rice transplanter could plant seedlings way faster and more accurately. People who were scared of the machine at first gained confidence as they learned to operate it themselves. After planting, the waiting began. Rice takes about 3 to 4 months to mature. During that time, you gotta manage the water, pull weeds, watch for pests. Korean soldiers and locals checked on the paddies every single day. As time passed, the rice grew like crazy. Those tiny seedlings got bigger and bigger, eventually reaching knee height. You could see the change in people's eyes. Is this really gonna work? Hope was starting to bloom. Around 3 months in, the rice started forming grain heads. Green heads appeared, then gradually filled with grain and started bowing down. When the locals saw this, they were speechless. Rice was actually growing in this land that had been underwater. In this land, mid-2022, harvest day finally came. The entire paddy had turned golden. Rice heads bowing in the wind, it was absolutely beautiful. Korean soldiers and locals grabbed their sickles and headed into the fields. When they cut the first bundle of rice, everyone there erupted in cheers. John Chul, the farmer we mentioned earlier, he cried. On this land where he'd lost everything to floods, golden rice was growing. You couldn't call it anything but a miracle. The harvest continued. The threshing machine from Korea did its work, and white rice grains came pouring out. And when they calculated the final harvest, everyone's jaws dropped. Before, when they farmed by hand with traditional crops, this land yielded about 500 kilograms. But this rice harvest? 5 tons. 5 tons. That's 10 times more. 10 times. Same land, same area. And get this, that wasn't even the end of it. Because South Sudan stays warm all year, you don't just harvest once and you're done. You can start the next crop immediately. In Korea, you can only grow rice once a year. But here, 3 times a year. 3 harvests. Do the math, it's insane. Land that used to produce 500 kilograms a year was now producing 15 tons annually. That's 30 times more. Enough to feed a family for a year with plenty left over to sell. They were making income now. The locals wanted to give this rice a special name. This wasn't just rice, it was miracle rice that changed their lives. After thinking about it, they came up with Korous. Korea plus Rous, their word for rice. Korous. Every time they looked at this rice, they'd remember Korea, remember the Hanbit Unit. It was a name filled with gratitude. The Hanbit Unit didn't just give them rice. They were working toward real self-sufficiency. Teaching them how to use agricultural machinery was part of it: tractor operation, rice transplanter use, thresher maintenance. These were skills people could use forever. The unit also rebuilt roads destroyed by floods. They reconnected villages so people could get to markets to sell their rice. You need roads for an economy to function. Medical support continued too. The unit's medical team provided free healthcare to locals. People suffering from malaria, malnutrition, all kinds of diseases, they got medicine and treatment. They taught Taekwondo to the kids. Not just for exercise but to instill discipline, respect, confidence. Watching children traumatized by war slowly brighten up through Taekwondo, that meant a lot to the Korean soldiers. John Chul said this, "What the Korean soldiers gave us isn't just rice. This is a gift that'll last forever. Now we know how to farm, and we can teach our children too." Another villager put it this way, "This is a gift from God. When we were in despair, soldiers from Korea brought us hope. We'll never forget this." And you know what? Rice farming started spreading throughout the Bor region. Other villages saw the pilot farm and wanted to start growing rice too. The Hanbit Unit didn't hold back, they helped everyone who asked. More and more land turned into rice paddies. The golden fields kept expanding. By 2023-2024, yields kept increasing. People got better at it, techniques improved, productivity went up. Now Bor has become the rice-producing region of South Sudan. Think about this for a second. Just 70 years ago, South Korea was one of the poorest countries in the world. After the Korean War, the land was in ruins. Our grandparents' generation fought against starvation. Back then, other countries helped us. The US, European nations, they sent food and supplies. With that help, Korea got back on its feet. And now, 70 years later, we've gone from receiving help to giving help. But Korea's approach was different. It wasn't just about handing out food. It was about teaching people how to feed themselves. The experience of developing rural areas through the Samal movement. The know-how of increasing productivity through mechanized farming. Korea shared all of that with South Sudan. And the results were incredible. Flooded wasteland turned into golden fields. Starving people had full bellies. People who'd lost hope found it again. That's real international cooperation. That's Korea's true power. So, what did you think of today's story? I'm not gonna lie, I got choked up several times while researching this. Seeing people who lost everything to war and floods get back on their feet with help from Korean soldiers, and not just receiving help, but gaining the power to stand on their own. Korous. Think about the meaning packed into that one name. It's a miracle created together by Korea and South Sudan. And this miracle is still happening. The Hanbit Unit is still active in South Sudan, spreading rice farming techniques to more villages. You know, we take rice for granted, right? We eat it every day. But somewhere in the world, there are still people desperately hungry for just one bowl of rice. And Korean soldiers, are becoming hope for those people. Doesn't that make you proud? The sweat Korean soldiers shed in South Sudan bloomed into golden rice. And that rice became more than just food, it became seeds of hope. That's real sharing. That's real peace. Somewhere in Bor, South Sudan, Korous rice is still growing right now. And the faces of locals looking at those fields are full of smiles. In those smiles, you'll find Korea. Thanks for watching. I'll be back with another great story next time.